Hey everyone. Hi folks. Can I get your attention please, just for a second? Everyone, please, 1 second. Thank you. Our popcorn was delayed, and I see a lot of people going out to grab popcorn. Please don't do that. We are going to come to your seats and give you popcorn and bring you popcorn, so don't worry. Amazing. And we're going to begin our formal start in about 2 minutes with a quick introduction from all the clubs organizing, and then at 6:30 we're going to launch straight into the debate. So thank you, everyone.
everyone. If you can please find your seats, now is the time. Please find your seats. The debate will be starting shortly, so please find your seats. Hello, everyone. We're going to be beginning our debate now, so please quiet down and find your seats. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this federal liberal conservative debate. It's a packed house tonight. Thank you all for being here. My name is Jordan Bauman, and it's a pleasure to be your moderator this evening. We live in a time where political discourse often happens in anonymous forums with little at stake and no incentive for respect or mutual understanding. However, today we bring you a live debate between two elected officials who are accountable to you, the Canadian electorate. In short, we hope to refresh you this evening. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce the organizers of this event who have put in the work to make it all possible. As you can see on the screen here, this is a collaboration between 4 student groups at the University of Waterloo. I'd like to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves. Please, go ahead.
Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Skylar Duggan. I am the policy coordinator at the University of Waterloo. Young Liberals.
Hello, everyone. I'm Laura. I'm the VP for the University of Waterloo Young Liberals.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nicholas, and I'm the president of the University of Waterloo Young Liberals.
This event was made possible by an interaction with Dr. Strauss at a Hanukkah event last year. He recognized me as someone in his Twitter comments, approached me, but we had a good conversation, and he gave me his number, and we were able to talk. So that's what made this possible.
It is not every day that students get to bring 2 sitting members of parliament from opposing parties into the same room to speak directly to the issues that matter most to us and our generation. The questions you will hear tonight were put together by both the Liberal and Conservative clubs because what we can agree on is that conversations like these matter. So thank you for being a part of it, and we really hope you enjoy tonight.
Huge shout out for Laura and Skylar. Just to bounce off what she was saying, a huge props to everyone who's put so much time, effort, and dedication into making this event possible. For us here at the University of Waterloo Young Liberals, we've always believed in the spirit of open dialogue and working towards better understanding each other. So again, huge thanks to everyone who made it work today.
Okay, my turn. Hello, everyone. My name is Alexander Campbell. I'm the president of the University of Waterloo Conservatives.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jared. I'm the vice president of the University of Waterloo Conservatives. I just want to thank everyone. On behalf of myself, the Liberals, the Forum, and the Political Science Student, holy cow, words. Political Science Student Association. Let's say it all together, everybody. PSSA. I want to thank everyone here from the bottom of my heart. I never thought 4 months ago I would be getting involved in politics, let alone my university politics, and making a collaborative event that everyone could partake in. But seriously, to the elected officials, all the people who put in the hard work, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for coming and making this happen. Give yourselves a round of applause, please.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Rashika. I'm the organization chair for the University of Waterloo Young Liberals, but I'm also the vice president for the Political Science Student Association. Yay! For the PSSA, if you will. So shout out to all of the political science students in the room. Thank you for making out. I know it's a very busy time. Thank you to all of the other students and community members who took time out of their day to make it out here to join us in this event tonight. We're glad to bring together elected officials to discuss larger issues facing students and also Canadians at large in our community. So thank you so much for being here tonight.
All right, thank you to all those introducing themselves. Finally, I'll just introduce the Waterloo Forum. We're doing the moderation tonight. That's the organization I represent. We've been hosting debates on campus here for a year, so it's natural for us to be the neutral forum where this debate is taking place. All right, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you our debaters for this evening. On the right is the Honorable Nate Erskine Smith, Liberal Member of Parliament for Beaches East York, lawyer, former federal housing minister, and host of the Uncommons podcast. Please give him a round of applause. On the left is Dr. Matt Strauss, Conservative Member of Parliament for Kitchener South Hespeler, medical doctor and former acting medical officer of health for Haldimand and Norfolk counties. Thank you for joining us, sir. Now, gentlemen, before I introduce the rules and we begin the debate, we'd like to give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves to the audience. Mr. Erskine Smith, we'll start with you. Please introduce yourself.
Check. We gotta put me on the clock. Yeah, no time for this. Oh, yeah, I get unlimited time. So my introduction will be an hour. I first want to give a shout out to Bardish, current colleague representing Waterloo here. I've got past colleague Val Bradford. I know there are provincial folks like Clayton and others who are here as well. So thank you for joining. For those of you who don't know me, so I've been the federal member of Parliament for Beaches East York over the last decade. So I ran for the first time, was elected for the first time in 2015. Before that, I practiced law and practiced commercial litigation. I did a little bit of volunteer work on the civil liberties side as well. And if you really track a long ways back, why I'm in politics in the first place. So I was raised in the East End of Toronto. My parents were both public school teachers. And my first experience in politics was on the picket line when we had a Mike Harris government at the time. And they were attacking public education. And I was on the picket line with my parents and at Queen's Park. I was at Queen's Park the other day and just talking with a student up in the audience about the OSAP cuts now feel very similar, where they've cut through to the point that people are mad and they're not going to take it anymore. It felt like that at the time. And you see firsthand the difference that politics makes, for better and worse. And you realize if you don't get involved, you don't participate, politics happens with or without you, and you end up worse off. And so I studied politics at Queen's and studied law at Queen's, and I did my Master of Laws in Political Philosophy at Oxford. And when I came back, I spent a few years practicing law and then jumped into politics. And I'll say this about 10 years in politics. For those of you who know me, you'll know that I don't always agree with the party, although I was laughing. Matt's got his face on the sign, and I've just got Liberal. What better team player just puts Liberal on their side, you know? But I will say I think it's really important the way we conduct ourselves in politics. We've got to act how we want the place to be. And my view of politics is I was drawn to politics because of community representation, representing the community that I grew up in. And I do think, we're there to support the government, in my case, the Liberal government on platform promises. We're there to support the Liberal government on confidence matters and Charter Human Rights matters. But there's got to be a lot of room to disagree. There's got to be a lot of room for reasonable disagreement. There's got to be a lot of room, more importantly, for adding new issues to the agenda. And I can run down a long list of, Canada Workers Benefit is stronger today because of advocacy that I've worked with colleagues to undertake. We have stronger worker protections when it comes to competition law because of work that I've undertaken. We've got stronger laws on public health. We've got stronger laws when it comes to funding for affordable housing or funding for pediatric cancer research. And you run down the list, truly there is no better way to make a difference than politics. So I'm very glad to see so many of you here, so many young faces here. Thank you for having me here and hosting us. Thank you to everyone who put it together. And I hope if you leave with anything today, it's that the answer really is participation, and I hope you keep showing up.
Oh, thank you. So the first thing I have to say is I'm so excited and amazed at how many people came out tonight. And I suspect you're excited for the same reason I'm excited, or excited enough to come out tonight. we are starved for proper, honest, sincere, important political debate in this country, and that's been the case for far too long now. I believe in debate because I don't feel like I've thought something through until I've had an argument about it. And that's why I respect Nate so much. I respect him coming out to argue with me about something. We'll find out what. Because his arguments make my thinking better, and my arguments make his thinking better. And that's the only way we're going to come at the closest thing to the truth of on a matter, and to have the best public policy that we can possibly have on a matter. By way of introduction, I was an English literature student here at the University of Waterloo. I graduated at age 18. I went on to medical school. I trained at Western McGill to become a critical care doctor. That's someone who specializes in life support. I loved my job. I served this community for more than a decade, but I always wanted to have a broader impact. I did a fellowship at the Monk School in journalism, and I became an assistant professor of medicine at Queen's University. During the pandemic, so I also married the girl of my dreams on March 14, 2020. Many of you will remember, many of you will remember that the lockdown in Ontario occurred on March 16th. So I was up every night, all night, the week before my wedding, trying to understand, like, was I putting my grandfather at risk by having our wedding? I read every single scientific paper that existed. I followed the reason and the arguments and the evidence where it led, and I knew it was safe to have our wedding, and I'm so glad we did. It was the best day of our lives. And I took that forward into the pandemic. And I feel so bad for ways in which governments made bad public policy decisions that hurt particularly young people, canceling their proms, canceling their band camps, canceling their high school graduations. And there's a lot of things that people won't get back for those years. So I argued forcefully for better public policy, and I found that arguments didn't always make the difference. And so I decided to put my money where my mouth was. I went into public health. I served as the acting medical officer of health for Haldeman Norfolk. And I'm proud to say that after, I think, a year and a half of better public policy decisions, we had a 30% lower COVID mortality in that community that I served than the province writ large. When I met Nate, I told him that he's always been my favorite Liberal MP, but I couldn't remember why. So I had to go back and figure out why. 10 years ago, I was a donor and a member of Fair Vote Canada, which was advocating for proportional representation, and so was Nate. He did a lot more work for it. But more than that, when the worst prime minister in Canada's history, Justin Trudeau, broke his promise to that organization, this man stood up to him. And he paid I don't think he'll say so, but he paid a career price for 10 years for standing up and speaking truth to power. So I will always respect him for that. And I hereby endorse him officially to be leader of the opposition in Ontario. I really do mean it. And I'll furthermore say, I could imagine a situation where I would endorse him to be Premier of Ontario. But for me to make that endorsement, I would have to see him be properly, consistently, and philosophically liberal. And
Or let you see your thoughts.
We'll get to the debate shortly, Joe. I was just saying, or I should just let you win the debate.
What I mean by that is the Liberal Party of Canada has forsaken its name and has become socialist, progressivist, leftist. Philosophical liberals like myself mean to expand human freedom. There's no, in the English tradition, the founder of conservative philosophy, Edmund Burke, was a liberal. He sat as a Whig in England's parliament and not as a Tory. And for the first 70 years, my party, the Conservative Party, was known as the Liberal Conservative Party. So I want to expand human freedom. And one thing that concerns me a great deal is that the Liberal Party of Canada and Nate and the other Liberal members who are here violated the charter by voting to impose the Emergencies Act on the truckers' convoy. I'm against such violations. I'm for expanding human freedom. And if Nate were to apologize or to express some regret for that vote, that would go a long way towards my endorsement. So that's one thing I hope to hear by the end of the night.
All right. Thank you both for those introductions. Now I'll introduce the format of the debate tonight. There's going to be 4 sections. The first is a set of 3 open-ended questions where each debater will get 2 minutes to respond and another 1 minute for rebuttals. The next section consists of 3 policy modeling questions where each debater proposes policies to address a problem. They're given 2 minutes to model their solutions and another 1 minute for rebuttals. The following section consists of adversarial questions drafted by the Liberal and Conservative clubs addressed to the opposing member of Parliament. Each response will be 2 minutes long. Finally, we'll end with an audience Q&A session. We'll see how much time we have for that. There'll be microphones that will be brought around for that. You'll put your hands up, and you can address your questions to either one or both MPs when that happens. Now, through this whole time, we ask for your respect as an audience. So while debaters are speaking, please don't interrupt them. Any egregious disturbances will prompt us to ask you to leave. To keep debaters on time and to get this night flowing smoothly, I've brought along a bell as well, just so they're aware. I'll ring it once when you have 10 seconds left in your time, and twice, like this, when time is up, okay? So without further ado, let's begin. We'll begin with our open-ended questions. The speaking order has been decided by a virtual coin flip, and so we'll have Dr. Strauss speaking first for this section, and Mr. Erskine Smith, you will speak second. We'll alternate that format for the next sections.
You can call us Matt and Nate.
Okay, cool. I'll call you Matt and Nate. That sounds great. All right, let's get to the first question here. It's this. Digital technologies and AI are increasingly shaping how Canadians access information and communicate. These technologies can broaden participation and access to knowledge, but they can also amplify misinformation, harassment, and other harmful content. What is the balance between allowing for freedom of expression and protecting public safety and democracy? Who should decide where that line is? Dr. Matt Strauss, you have the first response, and it'll be 2 minutes. We can start the timer. That would be great.
Thank you. I did my homework. So they told us what the topics were going to be. They didn't tell us what the questions would be. I thought it was going to be more technical than that. So I called my friend who's a computer science professor. I called an AI founder in this region. Today I called my friend Doug Trelevin, who is a tech entrepreneur and ran in the last campaign. But the question as you posed it is pretty simple to me. We have great laws. Harassment is illegal. Violent hate speech is illegal. I don't believe that those laws need to be updated for these technologies. Prosecutors, police, and judges will decide what falls offside on all of that. And the way you phrase the question, the liberal attempts to censor what you can say online, you still can't post news on Facebook, that has nothing to do with this issue of violence and hate speech and harassment. That's something else. That's clearly offside. That's clearly illiberal. And we should just go back to the laws that we have. And that's the most philosophically conservative position. Like, a lot of this was sorted out 800 years ago, Magna Carta, Runnymede, Glorious Revolution, Diefenbaker's Bill of Rights, etc. You should have free speech until you threaten violence against someone else. It's as simple as that. I'm struggling to get to the bell.
Okay, so we have laws that restrict speech in other ways, just to be clear. So there's hate speech for sure. We also have, as Matt says, we've got criminal laws around harassment. We also have defamation laws, and the real question is, I think, in some cases on the speech side, just a question of enforcement. That as we live increasingly our lives online, are we capable of enforcing some of those rules? But I actually think the conversation around AI goes beyond speech. We don't have Meta participating in news not because of any liberal ban, but because they made an active decision to put dollars before democracy. And it's not the first time that companies will do this. Of course they will put dollars before democracy. What we do need is a systemic framework. So you look at the use of AI. There are incredible uses for AI. Speak to a researcher at U of T about public health data sets and the inability to properly deploy AI to analyze those public data sets because of really red tape and restrictions, and we should be able to unlock the value of AI when we're looking at large public health data sets to deliver better research and better analysis and ultimately better care. There are other instances where we see more systemic risks and harms, and so we do have a framework federally for the civil service when we deploy algorithmic technology and this algorithmic impact assessments, and you assess the risks. A company should disclose those material risks. You then have a company that would be responsible for, this is basic negligence law, you would have a company that's responsible then for taking reasonable steps to mitigate those risks. And in a perfect world, you then have independent auditors that can look to say, are material risks being assessed properly? Are reasonable steps being taken to mitigate those risks? And have proper analysis and independent audits of that. That's more akin to the way the EU is moving towards, and I don't think we've as constructively had that conversation in Canada. In fairness, sometimes when we've talked about speech, we've talked about whack-a-mole and specific kinds of speech instead of looking at it from a system level, which is what we should do.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We'll now move to Matt for his rebuttal. Sir, you have 1 minute.
So it is true that the federal government did not say, we are banning news on Facebook. They came up with a very convoluted regulatory scheme where Facebook was going to have to put some extra money in for every, I don't even fully understand the regulatory framework that they put forward. What I know is that it was too complicated. Facebook felt it was a violation of their free speech, their ability to propagate news, and they said, we don't want to play that game. So I think that if you, it's very much like a really nice social media platform you have here. It'd be a shame if something happened to it. Please pay us some protection money so you can continue to enjoy the free speech that you're enjoying. If you're taxing people based on their use of speech, that's a restriction of free speech, and it's illiberal, and it should stop.
Nate.
Okay, so just be absolutely crystal clear on the speech piece with Facebook. So the idea was you have cannibalization of local news. The idea is to make sure that some of these big technology companies that are effectively have displaced some of that local news are paying into these systems. And Facebook didn't want to participate. And they did this before, by the way. Canada wasn't the first stop. They tried to fight Australia, where Australia was updating their competition laws to make sure they were having laws that were fit for purpose and in a modern society, and making sure these big tech platforms were paying more of their fair share. And when Canada went down this road, they tried to fight Australia, they lost. They fought Canada, and Google participated, others participated, and Facebook's opted out. We're all worse off for that decision to not allow news shared, but it's not a government decision, and it's nice for conservatives to say it is, but it's functionally a business decision because the business didn't want to comply with contributions to local media.
There we go, back online. Thanks for your answers to that first question. We'll now move to the second one, and it's in the spirit of bipartisanship. What is a major policy area that you agree with the opposing party on? Talk about why you agree with the other party and what needs to change inside your own party with respect to that policy. We'll begin with Dr. Strauss. You have 2 minutes. Your time starts now.
Oh, that's really difficult. So I would like. It's not that hard. Well, it's a little bit. No, because there's tons and tons and tons and tons of policy overlap. Like in many ways, like I described, our party used to be called the Liberal Conservative Party. There's so much in terms of vision that we agree on. We want Canada to be strong. We want to have the strongest economy in the G7. They say they want to protect fundamental human freedoms, and we definitely also want to do that. Because the second part of the question was what would have to change in our party for us to also support them. I think on those big picture pieces, we want to strengthen the military. We do not like Donald Trump and wish he would stop most, if not all, of the things that he's doing at the moment. So I don't, but they don't need our support to do those things that we agree with them on. We have supported them. We voted for their grocery rebate. We voted for Bill C-5, although Nate did not, and I abstained on the second reading because that was a terribly flawed piece of legislation. So I think we agree on more than we disagree on in terms of direction, and I don't think there's any work in my party that has to be done to achieve that.
I love that the example he gives is a bill that I didn't vote for, but actually I will pick up on that because I do think sometimes liberals shy away from a conversation around efficiency. Sometimes liberals shy away from a conversation around cutting red tape. Now conservatives tend to see red tape everywhere, but it actually sometimes is a liberal curse that we don't do the hard work of looking at rules in a clear-eyed way and saying, is this rule serving not just the public interest purpose, but is the public interest purpose outweighing any potential cost of this rule more broadly and going line by line and improving. Now, I think in the Harper era, they had this one-for-one rule, and it's still on the books actually, but the idea is when a government puts a new regulation in place, they then cut a regulation. You might think that's a good idea, but I think it's kind of a madness because it assumes that at this one moment in Canadian history, we have the perfect number of regulations. And that was just the magic number that we should always have, instead of, again, doing the hard work of saying, is this rule fit for purpose? I think C5, it was flawed in some ways, but one more broad challenge to C5 is now the Liberal government can identify projects in the national interest and cut red tape. That sounds all right, except what about all the other projects that aren't in the national interest or identified and designated in the national interest? What about every small business that day to day is confronted with different red tape and jumping through that hoop or jumping through this hoop? We should provincially, federally, municipally, we should be going line by line and saying, does this rule work? And housing is a great example, and I lived it for a few months. We have far too many rules in place that are municipal. We have far too many rules in place that provinces could adjust to make it easier to build. I quite liked when Pierre Poilievre was talking about driving down the cost of home building, making it easier to build, talking about it as a generational challenge. I wish he did more of that. I think he was more popular when he did more of that, and he should get back to it.
He's got would you yield me just a slight bit of time?
No. You have a rebuttal.
Oh.
You have 1 minute for rebuttal.
I don't
It's
even
totally
have a
fine.
rebuttal. I have
Totally
an agreement.
fine.
So first of all, I want to say that I totally agree with Nate's analysis of C5. Like that was a spot-on analysis, and what he's describing is why I abstained from it. Some amendments were made that kind of got it closer to what he was talking about, and then I felt that those were enough amendments to vote for it. He did not, but I very much respect that point of view. But just while you're talking about red tape, you twigged my memory. I was very, very happy last week to second a Liberal member's private member's bill. My second favorite Liberal MP, Marcus Pulowski from Thunder Bay, he's likewise a physician. He has a private member's bill to cut red tape to get children with rare cancers, rare medicines. And so, right now, he has a story of an ICU doctor who had to spend 6 hours on the phone trying to get a bleeding 7-year-old important medications. Like that's a no-brainer. It was the easiest thing in the world to support it. And I just wanted to assure everyone here that when stuff like that comes along, it gets bipartisan support.
Thank you, Matt. When I move to Nate, 1 minute rebuttal starts now. Sorry, we'll reset the time here. Go ahead.
Check. Okay. I don't need a ton of time because I think there's some agreement here. I would just say if Marcus Pulowski was here and not me, I'm sure I would be his second favorite Liberal. Maybe not.
Thanks for your answers to both of those questions. We'll now move on to the third question, and that is this. For young people today, there are many reasons to avoid politics. Increased polarization, the risk of suffering abuse, and at times the apparent dysfunction of parliament. If a university student told you that they were discouraged from entering politics, what would you honestly tell them? And what must change to make politics more attractive? Matt?
I would agree with them, and I would urge them to run away. Like honestly, like I didn't want to do this. We can talk in more detail. Like when I say politics followed me to the university and the hospital and in public health, like everything became way too political, and politics can ruin your life. And I suspect over the pandemic that many of you had your lives ruined. I mean, you're still here now, and we're stronger for it, I suppose. But like very core human experiences were deprived from people. I met people in the hospital who were experiencing Russian novel levels of terror and social deprivation. I met 2 elderly women from a nursing home who were starving to death because during the lockdown their families weren't allowed to come in and help feed them. So politics, like you might not care about politics, but politics can ruin your life. So if it's not ruining your life right now, that's awesome. I hope you are able to avoid it. I hope you are able to go build businesses, go do PhDs, do life-saving cancer research. But we have to acknowledge that that the pandemic was one glaring area where people were seriously hurt by bad public policy. But it remains the case, particularly for the young people in this room, your chances of owning a house in the next 10 years are not good statistically. Groceries are becoming less and less affordable. Healthcare is becoming less and less accessible. After the pandemic, I took my wife to the emergency room. It's my pinned tweet, but she almost died being treated like cattle at an emergency room. So like things can get so bad if we don't take care to make them better. So it's a very frustrating pursuit. I hope that you don't have to concern yourselves with politics, but worrisomely, I think you do for now. If you want to own a home and start a family and have proper health care, you have to start paying attention.
Nate, go ahead.
There are undoubtedly costs to politics. Matt's got a 1-year-old and 3-year-old. I've got a 9-year-old and 6-year-old. It's a cost to be away from family and your loved ones. There's a cost, an opportunity cost. You could be doing all sorts of other things with your life and not putting up with comments on, reply guys on Twitter or whatever it might be, right? So there are undoubtedly costs to politics. At the same time, find me a better way to make a difference. And if you're frustrated about something, or there's a problem that is affecting you directly, and Matt's exactly right. I mean, the housing crisis is a generational challenge for all of you. The OSAP cuts are a problem for all of you. Name your problem that directly affects you, or a problem that affects a loved one, and I guarantee it all tracks back. It all tracks back to politics. And if you want better, you should participate. And yeah, you're gonna have to put up with a lot of bullshit along the way. That's the nature of politics. But find me a bigger way to make a difference. And you get to make a difference not only substantively, you get to make a difference if you're in the game, you get to make a difference about how people perceive politics, and you can actually change the culture of politics. Sometimes rule changes can help, but how we act really matters in politics. Even the act of doing this tonight really matters in our politics. When I was studying political philosophy, there's this noble idea of what politics can and should be, of this, this place of debate and this place of thoughtfulness and ideas, and then you see politics firsthand, and you go, well, people don't actually feel that way. It's when my Uncle Charlie was, he would fit right in with the Conservative Party. When he passed, he gave me back his Liberal donor card because he didn't want to die a Liberal. And when I went from a lawyer to public office as a politician, he was like, is that a step down, a step up? Seems like a lateral move. It's not a very trusted profession. And yet it should be, because it really is, it bottoms out. It's public service. It's actually helping your community and those around you. And all of you, you should all think about running for office one day. If you want to make, whatever the issue is that you want to make a difference on, it all tracks back to politics.
Thank you. Matt, you have 1 minute for a rebuttal.
I guess my hope is that you wouldn't have to, and I guess we do have a sincere disagreement there. I hope that you don't have to run for office. I feel like a lot of the times the solutions are simple, and I've disclosed that I'm a philosophical liberal. I think people need to be allowed to live their lives, and if we allow them to live their lives, home builders could build homes. And Nate kind of got it spot on. It is government regulation and heavy-handedness and red tape that is preventing home builders from doing that. Like, it's builders want to build, and it is politicians who stop them. So I hope that, I guess I also want to make the point that there's so many ways for you to be political activists without having to be politicians necessarily. And I think while you're building your career, that I would consider that much more than running for elected office.
Thanks, Nate.
So I agree there are many ways to make a difference. There's no doubt about it. And not all of you have to put your name on a ballot, but you should all recognize the importance of involving yourselves in the day-to-day of public affairs and politics, and you should not opt out of that no matter what profession you pursue. I will say there's another part of the story that Matt does not tell when it comes to something like housing and the role of government as being a force for good. Government absolutely should get out of the way when it comes to rules that do not serve a public interest purpose. For sure, and housing is a very good example of that. Cutting red tape, exclusionary zoning, the idea of protecting neighborhood character at the expense of new entrants into the housing market, for sure. Guess what, though? I grew up in a co-op. Co-ops are not going to be delivered by the private sector for profit. They simply will not be. And if you truly care not only about getting as much housing built as possible, but a mix of housing that is going to serve all of this, you damn well better care about politics, and you might care about government as a force for good, delivering affordable, non-market housing.
Thank you both for your answers. It's a great section. We'll now be moving to our policy modeling questions. Each question, we've asked the debaters to first model their solutions, their policy solutions. We give them 2 minutes for that, and then they have 1 minute for rebuttals as the second round. We'll switch the order of speaking, so Nate, you will start first, and then Matt, you'll answer second. Let's begin with the first question. It's this. Housing costs in Canada have risen significantly faster than wages, creating real barriers for students and new graduates, both in being able to afford a house and finding available housing, say when relocating for work or co-op. What policies would you implement to address this problem? Nate, you have 2 minutes. Time starts now.
So it may not surprise you to learn that I've thought a lot about this question, partly because in 2023 I ran for the Ontario Liberal leadership, and our campaign was very much focused on housing, and then for a minute I was the housing minister. And you run down the list, I think it's fundamentally about three things. And we've talked about this already. I've canvassed this to a degree. But one, it's getting government out of the way and driving down the costs of home building. So red tape is part of it for sure. We can talk about development charges, and there are many costs to building homes, and we need to drive down the costs. And government does have a role to play when it comes to housing enabling infrastructure, and there's lots of different ways we can talk about driving down the cost of home building. Two, though, government has to get back in the game on building non-market housing at scale and supporting that kind of home building at scale. We are less than half of the OECD average when it comes to non-market housing, and Ontario right now is the only province in our country that does not have a provincial housing agency, and we've downloaded these responsibilities repeatedly to municipalities that are ill-equipped to deal with them on their own. The third piece is we need to treat housing as a home first and an investment second, and there are not unlimited rules we can put in place, but there are rules we can put in place that would then preference you as home buyers instead of people who are, if you're going to bring investment dollars to build, have at it. We want to attract that investment. But if you're bringing investment dollars into the residential resale market to compete with you as first-time home buyers, that strikes me as a problem if we're treating your capital equally and your opportunity equally. Similarly, when we treat housing as a home first, if we truly treat housing as a home first, we would be not seeing a doubling of homelessness over the last decade in Ontario, but we would be treating homelessness with the seriousness that it deserves, not only as a matter of dignity, because everyone deserves dignity in our society, but also to ensure that our main streets are there for businesses and not tents, and our parks are there for families and not tents. And if we did it right, we would have dignity and also opportunity for all.
Thank you, Nate. Move to Matt.
Yeah, I'm basically going to reiterate Nate's first point, because it is true. I do think that is the whole solution, that the free market is the greatest wealth generation, voluntarist, liberal system that there has ever been. I want to tell you a quick story. I have a friend, his name is Arbin. He came to Canada with the shirt on his back, fleeing a communist country in Eastern Europe, Albania. He washed dishes at a hotel downtown. He started doing home renovations on his time off. He now is a small to moderate-sized housing developer in the region. He bought a plot of land. He said, I'm going to put 36 townhouses here. The city of Cambridge said, no, you're not. You're going to put 16. And he was like, why? It's my land. I thought I left communism, and there's enough room for 32. And he had to fight them. He had to get lawyers. He had to go to the Ontario Land Tribunal Board for 2 years. So that was 2 years where 32 people should have been in their 32 families should have been in their brand new homes in this community, that he had to fight city council because they only wanted 16. It didn't make any sense. And I have that exact story or ones that sound like it from every corner of the province, from every corner of the nation. Like, it's politicians don't build houses, builders do, and we just have to let them. And this poor man was tearing his hair out and losing money on the investment for all that time. So I don't think that, I think there already is a solution. It's called property rights. When Pierre Trudeau brought forward our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, property rights were left out. That was a terrible oversight, and I think it's why we're experiencing the problems that we are now. A city council should not be telling a developer how many houses he's allowed to put there when there are homeless families looking for houses. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
We'll now move into our time of rebuttals. 1 minute. Go ahead, Nate.
So there are rules that get in the way. There are also rules that protect people. And let's talk about tenant protections, for example. If you only have a view that is property rights focused, if you only have a view that is about cutting red tape, yeah, you're going to get more housing built for sure, but you're not going to have security of tenure for tenants. And tenant protections are a central a set of rules, and we debate which tenant protection should be in place and how fulsome and exactly what rules. But if the system is no tenant protections, that's a much worse system for security of tenure and stability in our lives. And I think fundamentally where we are going to disagree is I believe in liberty seriously and significantly. I just think it's one of the core twin values, and the one that Matt's missing is equality. Both liberty and equality matter for our society, and governments should pursue both.
Thank you.
So Nate's like 90% of the way there. He acknowledges that housing supply would increase if we allowed for property rights for builders to build. And I said nothing about removing tenant protections. I'm not against tenant protections. I'm against city councils standing in the way of builders for, I don't know, like they come up with umpteen different reasons to stand in the way. Who here has taken Econ 101? Lots in the room. If the supply of housing goes up, the price of housing goes down, and then housing becomes more affordable for everyone. If you build a little bit of affordable housing, the price of that will go up because you don't have enough supply, and like the free market always inserts itself. There's something else I wanted to say about that. Oh, it's slipping my mind now. There is a big social science literature on what determines the proportion of citizens that are homeless, and the cost of housing. The average cost of one-bedroom rent is the single variable that most.
Fair. Thank you. All right. So we'll now move on to our second question, which is this. Canada's healthcare system is overwhelmed with long wait times across the country. Some provinces are expanding privately delivered, publicly funded healthcare services to reduce wait times. However, critics argue this risks creating a two-tier system that widens inequalities in access. Describe how you believe the federal and provincial governments should approach the problem of healthcare understaffing while clarifying the involvement of the private sector. 2 minutes.
Okay, so this is a more complex question than 2 minutes allows for, because we have a ton of private delivery in our existing public healthcare system. The core question is a question of public health insurance. That should be non-negotiable in our system. And when it comes to private delivery, the thing that we absolutely need oversight over in a clear-eyed way is to make sure we don't see upselling. We don't see additional charges that undermine that idea of universality, that undermine that idea of core public health insurance. Now, there are many different ways to improve the system. In some cases, you look at Life Labs and the duopoly of blood services. That probably needs more competition, frankly, all things considered. In other cases, we need to make sure we are. In other cases, we've got to make sure we're improving our system by looking at, take family doctors and people who don't want to become family doctors, not because of it's private delivery within the public system, but the challenge is people don't want to be necessarily small business owners. They don't want to do the paperwork. They don't want to have the headache of running that little practice when they can step into an emergency room or they can step into another setting, in some cases make more money, but certainly be free of headaches. And so how do we, looking at the challenges in the healthcare system, one core challenge is you've got over 2 million Ontarians that don't have access to a family doctor. How do you solve that core problem? You've got to make sure you are identifying regions that are underserved. It tends to be rural, remote, and in some cases low-income neighborhoods in more urban settings. And then how are you making sure you're driving doctors into those spaces and supporting doctors to get into practice and serve patients in those spaces? And so I actually think in some ways the public-private debate can be a bit of a red herring. We have to make sure we maintain public health insurance, and when we see an expansion of private delivery, and unfortunately we do see this in Ontario, it can't be a premier trying to help his friends. It's got to be how do we actually improve.
Thank you. Matt, you have 2 minutes.
We're having trouble finding disagreement. So first of all, I want to say I agree with Nate. We're going to have public insurance in Canada, and like it would be morally reprehensible for a child to die because their mother can't afford penicillin, and nobody's touching that core concept in our healthcare system. I don't think that the issues of public and private, I agree that the debate is overplayed because there isn't really a debate, but the principles matter. So when my wife was waiting for 6 hours, our son was 2 days old, after 6 hours, there's no doctor, no bed, no blood work. I told the triage nurse in Emerge, I'm a doctor, I'm gonna take her home. If she bleeds again, I'm gonna take her to a different hospital because like this is crazy. And he said, yes, please, that would be great, thanks. And so again, I'm not for a private system, but if you go to a burger restaurant and you say, I'd like a burger, and 6 hours later you don't have a burger, and you say, I'm gonna go to another burger restaurant, and they say, that would be great, thanks. Like that place is going out of business. Like without, like so you can have a strong public insurance model, but then if you take out the idea of competition, you lose the invisible hand, and then suddenly everyone's incentive is to like get you to take your bleeding postpartum wife home instead of providing her the care so that she's a happy customer. So I think if we could build competition back in so that all of the hospitals in town are interested in getting your business because they want to charge your OHIP cards. You're not using your credit card, but they're competing for your business instead of like trying to push you out. I think that's the only way we can bring the invisible hand back in and get those efficiencies back. I want to tell a really quick story. Maybe I will with the next minute. I have a friend. He trained for 10 years to be an ENT surgeon. He gets 4 days to operate at Guelph General Hospital, and frequently his OR day is canceled per month. So it's 4 days per month. He's allowed to do cosmetic surgery all day long in 2 private ORs that he built. And he just wants to know, why can't I bring my OHIP patient down here, charge their OHIP card to do the same surgery for less than the hospital does?
Sorry about that.
Okay, so I just want to emphasize 2 things with the minute that I've got. And the first is that core piece of oversight to ensure we don't see upselling. When you look at the Auditor General reports in Ontario, when we see an analysis of the privatization that we do have in the system, when we see an expansion of it, we oftentimes see a correlation with upselling and unnecessary charges, and we absolutely need provincial set of leadership that's going to take that seriously, to have that core idea of public health insurance that is properly protected. The second piece is, look, when you are adding competition, and if the overriding focus is to ensure outcomes are improved for patients, we've got to follow the data, and we've got to embrace better outcomes for patients. Unfortunately, the provincial government that we've got will make decisions based on lobbying and who's at a wedding and who are their friends, not the best outcomes for them.
Sorry about that. All right, we'll move to Matt. 1 minute.
I think I just want to finish the story about my friend who is the ear, nose, and throat surgeon who also does cosmetic surgery. Nate, if you become opposition leader, if you become premier, I would love to take you there. Because if you walk through, he built with his own money 2 brand new ORs. He's got anesthetists, he's got nurses, he's allowed to do cosmetic surgery all day long, every day. He's a great guy. So to keep his skills up, because the hospital doesn't give him enough time to operate, he flies to Ukraine to do facial trauma reconstructive surgery on like people who stepped on landmines. So he's a fantastic man who wants to serve the community, and it just breaks your heart to walk through it and see an empty OR that has never been used, and he wants to see OHIP patients there. And he can do that the day the Minister of Health signs the proposal. And I don't see the political will from either party in this province or in many other provinces to.
Thank you both. I can appreciate you're both very passionate about this. We'll now move on to our 3rd question, which is this. Immigration is vital to Canada's prosperity, bolstering our country's labor markets and communities while supporting an aging workforce and mitigating declining birth rates. However, while immigration rates have been high in recent times, the infrastructure necessary to accommodate new immigrants has been insufficient. Moving forward, how should the federal government structure its immigration strategy to balance economic needs and the availability of housing and services? Nate, we'll start with you again. 2 minutes.
I remember having this conversation with Sean Fraser when he was the immigration minister, and talking about how our targets have to be aligned with provincial governments when it comes to their housing targets, when it comes to their ability to deliver the basics on infrastructure. There should be an alignment in how we manage targets together. Now, we have seen challenging immigration numbers post-pandemic for a few years, principally because of 2 pieces. A small piece was the Temporary Foreign Workers Program, and a much larger piece was the International Mobility Program and international students, which was, again, I think a problematic challenge, particularly in Ontario, but where you saw public-private colleges that were supercharged. You saw effectively, there are great international students. International students more broadly are incredible contributors to our community, but this system was incredibly mismanaged by Ford, and then we came in too late, I would say, at the federal level to fix those rules and to bring numbers down. And so you need to make sure that immigration is ultimately sustainable. It's an incredible contributor to, you go to, my wife's from a small town, southwestern Ontario. You talk to Marcus Pawlowski up in northern Ontario. There are certain communities that we absolutely need immigration to sustain jobs in some of these communities and businesses in these communities. And in other cases, there are sectors where we absolutely need, you look at healthcare workers, or you look at long-term care, you look at certain areas of the system where we absolutely need to be welcoming folks in and making sure that we are addressing workforce shortages. You look at our humanitarian obligations. There's all family reunification. There's all sorts of reasons to support long-term, significant, sustainable immigration, but that question of sustainability has to be a partnership between federal and provincial governments in a much more serious way.
Thank you, Nate. Matt, you have 2 minutes.
But Nate, they didn't have to quadruple the number of people they were letting in per year in a single year. Like that was the federal government that allowed that. You mentioned there were 2 problems, but both problems were Sean Fraser problems. And I'd be very interested in the next minute that you have to tell us about how the Liberal Party decided to go from $250,000 a year to $1 million a year. I love immigration. My mother is a refugee to this country. I remember seeing a CBC article 8 years ago, and I've since looked it up. The University of Waterloo ran an international math contest and found this 14-year-old genius in Indonesia and said, come to the University of Waterloo, study mathematics here. And I think the last I was able to follow up on him, I think he ended up doing graduate work here as well. But I want all of the math geniuses in Indonesia to be able to come to Canada. I can't understand why we've built a system where the Tim Hortons by the house where I grew up in is still the Tim Hortons closest to my house today. It's very close to Jacob Hespeler High School. And my whole life, it was staffed by high school students from Jacob Hespeler High School. Now it's entirely staffed by temporary foreign workers, and nobody at the high school can find a job. It's totally bananas. And I don't think it's not fair to the high school students. It's not fair to the healthcare system, which likewise was not. We did a study on this. It's not fair to the high school students. It's not fair to the healthcare system, which likewise was not. We did a study on this. It's not. Who are frequently coming here on a false bill of goods. I've heard terrible stories of their whole extended family mortgaged farms in India to send them here to be here temporarily working in a Tim Hortons. It's terribly unfair. It's a false promise. It breaks the promise of Canada that this country made to my mom and her family when she came as a refugee, and it breaks my heart.
1 minute.
I think we just have to clarify distinctions between 2 kinds of programs. So the temporary foreign worker program, look, you talk about committee work. I'm on the industry committee. We had immigration officials before us in April, May 2022, and you can read Hanser where I was saying if we have an influx and we open this program to align with business interests, we're going to see low-income wages driven down. That's the basic economics of it. They push back, and I think the record's clear that is what's happened, and you give the example of a Tim Hortons, but I remember meeting Boston Pizza lobbyists at one point for Restaurants Canada, and they said, we want to keep the program. We understand it's a little less popular. We're just going to rename the program. I was like, well, that's not answering the challenge. The challenge is, how do you make sure it's sustainable? How do you make sure there is an abuse of the program, especially abuse of workers and workers' rights? And how do you make sure that folks are protected? But you got to keep in mind, in the Harper era, we saw at the top number, it was 130,000 on the temporary foreign worker side. Top line number in 2024 was 190,000. It's really the international mobility program that has quadrupled, and we can talk about that in more detail.
Thank you, Nate. Matt, 1 minute.
We keep finding points of agreement. So, I mean, thank you for acknowledging that. But I didn't get the answer I was looking for, which is just how was it determined on the Liberal benches? And it's fine if you're not going to speak ill of the team that you've spent 10 years with, but how did this happen? When you were studying public policy at Queen's or Oxford or both, did anyone ever run a case study of what if we quadruple immigration this year? It's bananas, and it's hurt a lot of people. Oh, another story I wanted to say is the director of the Mundir, the Hindu temple in my riding. He has a terrible story where he was called at 3 a.m. to come to the hospital because 13 of these temporary foreign work. Well, you can read about it in the news, sadly. But the point is, real people have been really hurt by this bananas public policy decision.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you both for your answers in this section. We'll now move on to our final set of pre-prepared questions. These are the adversarial questions. So these have been written by the opposing club. So the Liberal club has put questions to Matt and vice versa. So I think you'll both enjoy them. They should be interesting. Yeah. We'll go back to Dr. Strauss being asked first, and then we'll switch over to Nate. So Dr. Strauss, this question is for you. You'll have 2 minutes to respond. Dr. Strauss, you have made public statements saying that just listening to science is naive, implying COVID policy depends more on values than facts. Sharing your perspectives online, you had stated that I would sooner give my kids COVID-19 than a McDonald's Happy Meal. This comment, which downplayed the risks of COVID-19 for children, clashed with mainstream medical views that emphasize the virus's potential severity. Given this, where do you draw the line between public health and healthcare capacity and protecting individual freedom? How do you address concerns that such rhetoric may have contributed to public skepticism toward evidence-based pandemic precautions?
I wholly reject the premise of the question. That comment was medically accurate and put the risk of COVID to children into perspective. So that I made that comment in the fall of 2020 when parents were not wanting to send their kids to school, which is fundamental to their growth and development, education. And we knew at that time, but people didn't understand, I think, publicly until years later. The risk of a healthy toddler dying of COVID was less than 1 in a million. Conversely, hyperpalatable, hyperprocessed foods, such as those served at McDonald's, have real deleterious effects on children's metabolism and on their lifespan. When I made that tweet, I posted the best scientific literature available to that point, and to the point that if you are obese on your 18th birthday, you are 4 times less likely to make it to 30 than if you are not. So we need to put risks into perspective, and we did horrible things to toddlers and children in terms of masking at daycares. And my best friend had a 9-year-old, and he asked what waterboarding was, and I explained over breakfast. I was staying over. It's when they put a towel on your face and then pour water on it. And he said, "Oh, is that like when they made us play soccer with masks in the rain?" And I was like, yeah, that is absolutely the same thing. So I put risks into perspective properly, and I made a true statement about how my family governs their health. My daughter has never had a Happy Meal, and we've all had COVID twice. Where did you start? Oh, the point about science and values, that is a straightforward, ironclad statement from David Hume, the most important philosopher of science by my lights. You can't get an ought from an is. What you should do and what is are totally separate fields of philosophic inquiry.
Thank you, Matt. As I said earlier, there will be no rebuttals for this round, so we'll just move on to the question for you, Nate. Feel free to ask questions about this when it's Q&A time. All right.
You're not going to tweet that playing soccer in the rain with a mask is like, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
All right, let's move on to our question. Statistics Canada confirmed that 84,000 jobs were lost last month, with unemployment rising from 6.5 to 6.7%. There are now more Canadians actively seeking work than there are available positions. Furthermore, Canada's youth unemployment rate is significantly higher than the national average, with recent graduates struggling to enter a labor market that federal policy has made increasingly competitive. The federal government has simultaneously maintained the temporary foreign worker program while setting record immigration targets, expanding labor market competition at the direct expense of young Canadians who did everything right and cannot find work in the country they were born in. Mr. Erskine Smith, how do you reconcile record immigration targets and the temporary foreign worker program with the lackluster employment prospects of young Canadians? 2 minutes.
Okay, so this builds off of the previous round in some ways, but let's make sure we understand the different programs we're talking about, because this is in some ways born out of a Polyev promise in September to end the temporary foreign worker program. You got to keep in mind that a huge chunk of that program is actually agricultural workers, which is not consistent with the premise of the question, is not competing with young people. You then have to add on to the data where are and I'm not dismissive of the challenge in urban centers, which is why the temporary foreign worker program has been changed to say where unemployment rates are above 6% in urban centers, then you don't have access to the low-income wage stream. They've capped the low-income wage stream in other places for other employers, and there are real instances in Northern Ontario and other places where, in other sectors, where it is an important part of the overall picture. So I don't want to come to great defense of that program in all ways, but let's also keep in mind what the real challenge has been, because it hasn't been the temporary foreign worker program that, again, under Harper was 90,000, 110,000, 130,000, and we've seen growth to about 180 to 190,000. It's the International Mobility Program, which includes international students, and Ford was advised, Wynne was advised, that you don't allow the supercharging of international students, especially business admin degrees and other things, which people were using really as a pathway to permanent residency. And federal rules were part of the problem for sure, but the province supercharged this by explicitly promoting public-private colleges, which allowed Conestoga to go from low thousands to literally tens of thousands of international students, Algoma to go from 900 to 9,000. We saw massive, massive growth in international students, which was an Ontario problem, and the feds should have stepped in sooner.
Thank you for that answer, Nate. We'll now move again to Matt. This is your question. Dr. Strauss, the Conservative Party today criticizes floor crossing and opposes allowing MPs to switch parties without a by-election. Yet, in 2018, the Conservative Party celebrated Leona Alislev's decision to leave the Liberals for the Conservatives, and when Mr. Poilievre was an MP, he supported David Emerson, Wajid Khan, and Joe Kamuzi crossing the floor, even voting against an NDP bill in 2012 that would have required by-elections for floor crossers. Why does your party oppose floor crossing now when in the past you welcomed it? How do you reconcile this with your stated support for free votes and free speech rather than strict party discipline? You have 2 minutes.
Okay, so you'll have to forgive me. I wasn't aware that the Conservative Party has a policy against floor crossing without by-election. That would be news to me.
I did not read this question.
Okay, so I know who did. Yeah. So I don't think either my leader or the party has come out and said that. I think the person who wrote the question might be confusing online chatter from conservative aligned individuals with party policy. I was very, very critical, in particular, of Michael Maw's crossing, and I'll tell you why. Because tens of thousands of people voted for me. I take that confidence they put in me, the trust they put in me, very, very seriously. And they deserve to have me do what I said I was going to do and to fight for the things that they asked me to fight for. Michael Maw, 1 week before crossing, said that the Liberals are creating a slave-like feudalism system. Like he was denouncing them in the most, like frankly, more flagrant language than I would choose to use, and then joined them a week later without any explanation whatsoever. For instance, if Nate told the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, 10 years ago, I can't believe you broke your promise on proportional representation. I cannot sit in this party anymore. And if he crossed the floor and said, this Prime Minister broke his party, I'm crossing for this reason to uphold the trust that my electors put in me, I would have applauded. He didn't, I'm not saying, I wasn't there for those conversations. No. Okay. But like, I just think, in general, politicians need to be responsible and need to be open enough to say, this is why I had a total 180, change of heart, change of conviction. And Michael Mott to this day has not really done that. He said, he did eventually give an interview after a public outcry and said, oh, I just like Mark Carney's approach, which was like terribly vague. And just 6 months earlier, he ran against Mark Carney and for all the things we were proposing. So it doesn't make sense, and his voters should be concerned.
Give it right back. All right.
It's a hard question. You can answer it.
Yeah. That's right. Happy to. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Here it is. The Prime Minister has publicly identified China as Canada's greatest national security threat. A government that has interfered in Canadian federal elections, executed Canadian citizens, imprisoned 2 Canadian citizens for nearly 3 years as political prisoners, placed bounties on others, and operates slave labor camps imprisoning Uyghur Muslims. CSIS directly warned sitting members of parliament that they were being targeted by Chinese interference networks. However, earlier this year, our government signed a deal with China that includes closer partnership on security. How can Canada both fight Chinese interference and security threats, but also cooperate more on those very security issues?
Okay, so let's be crystal clear about the timeline of how we got to where we got, right? So you have a situation where, you know, in the preamble to that question, there's a lot of truth in the challenges that we've experienced in the 10 years that I've been in politics. We've experienced those challenges, whether it's the 2 Michaels or the human rights issues or the, you know, I don't know if that was even included, but I was at a press conference with Amnesty International calling out China's treatment of Hong Kong democracy activists, and you run down the list and foreign interference and everything else. It's also true that when we had the weaponization of trade as against us by China initially, years ago, it was because we were marching in lockstep with the United States around the detention of a Huawei executive. And canola farmers and other farmers suffered the consequences of that. You then fast forward to the summer of 2024. What do? We marched in lockstep again with then President Joe Biden in imposing 100% EV tariffs on China, not compliant with WTO. The EU did it differently, but we were marching in lockstep with the US, and guess what happened? Our canola farmers and our lobster fishermen and pea farmers, everyone suffered the consequences of that with the weaponization of tariffs in response. So what was this deal? What was this deal? Well, I think Carney explained it very well. He said, this is not a broad, overarching free trade deal. This is taking the world as it is, and when you have a longtime ally who is then weaponizing tariffs as against us at the expense of so many Canadians, especially in Ontario, our auto sector, our steel sector, and more, it's incumbent upon a Prime Minister to say we are going to make sure we eliminate other irritants. Irritants that, by the way, were precipitated by our cooperation with the United States hand in hand. And when the United States has walked away from that partnership, you're damn right we're going to make sure we alleviate the stresses and the challenges that were precipitated by that very partnership in the first place.
Thank you. Appreciate your response. All right, we'll now move to Dr. Strauss again. Dr. Strauss, you represent every resident of Kitchener-South Hespeler, including LGBTQ and gender-diverse peoples. In November, you asked why hungry taxpayers should fund multi-gender occupancy and asked whether any genders exist other than men and women. While in the House, you also said Canada should be a place where people are accepted regardless of sexual orientation and gender identity. Which principle will guide how you treat and advocate for those constituents in your own riding, and where exactly do you stand on the government funding 2S LGBTQI+ enabling initiatives? 2 minutes.
That was a complete misquote, and I can't repeat. So I can't respond to the quote. I don't recall what it was that I was said. Like, it was so far off from what I've said.
Hungry taxpayers should fund multi-gender occupancy.
Well, so that was a curtail quote. What was the second quote?
Whether any genders exist other than men and women.
Yeah, I don't know that I said that in that committee. But I'll talk about something else or related. I was asking Global Affairs Canada why they chose to send $4 million to fund multi-gender occupancy at Ski Soldier School in Lebanon. That is what I was asking about. I'm not against multi-gender occupancy. I think in this country, our soldiers should be housed appropriately. I cannot understand why you'd be sending $4 million for Ski Soldier School in Lebanon. Like, Lebanon's a hot country. I don't know how much ski soldiering there is to do there, but I would think there's more to do here. Like, I think we have more ski soldier requirements than they would in Lebanon. And the point of that question was just to see if the bureaucrats who gave away your money, that was $4 million that you all had here, that you could have spent on your priorities, if they could possibly explain to Canadians why they sent it to Ski Soldier School in Lebanon. I furthermore asked them how many multi-gender occupancy spaces are being created, when will those spaces be created, how many genders are going to be accommodated in these multi-gender accommodations, and they had no answers for any of that. So they don't even know what they're sending money away for. That's a microcosm. It's one of my favorite examples of how our government is just spewing money away all over the place. There's an $80 billion deficit this year. So just this year, every single man, woman, and child in this room is on the hook for another $2,000 from a prime minister who promised to spend less. So you're now $2,000 more in the hole than you were this time last year, and they're spending it on things like gender-neutral rice in Vietnam and multi-gender occupancy in Lebanon, and the list goes on and on. I don't want to misquote any of them, but it's crazy. They're not respecting your money, and when we talk about the economy doing poorly, which it has been for 11 years, the fact that they're taking money from all of you that you could use to start a business and sending it to Lebanon for multi-gender occupancy at Ski Soldier School is ridiculous.
Thank you. All right. We'll now move on to the question for Nate. It's this. Statistics Canada shows that 92% of gun crime is committed with illegal firearms, none of which are captured by the federal buyback program. Police services across Canada, including the OPP, have formally refused to participate. Alberta and Saskatchewan have passed legislation actively resisting federal enforcement. The program is projected to cost between $700 million and $1 billion, while cross-border smuggling, which is the actual source of illegal firearms in Canada, remains entirely unaddressed. Mr. Erskine Smith, given that law enforcement and multiple provincial governments have rejected this program, can you explain why it remains the federal government's primary approach to gun violence? You have 2 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to start with a very personal tragedy, which I represent Beaches East York, and probably the hardest moment I've ever had in my politics is, and that our community has experienced in many ways over the last 10 years, is the Danforth shooting. Reese Fallon was killed in it. She was a young Liberal volunteer with us, and probably the hardest speech I've ever had to give was at her funeral. And that gun was not, didn't start out as an illegal gun. It was a handgun that started out as a weapon for sale in a Saskatchewan gun shop that then was ultimately stolen and diverted into the illegal supply. When you look at TPS stats, because we went through a gun control conversation and debate federally, and looking at those Toronto Police Service stats, they don't have perfect information on all sources of crime guns, but 25% of crime guns were domestically sourced. And look, I don't think, I actually agree that, of course, the border is a big part of this conversation. If you ignore that part of the conversation, you're doing it wrong, of course. And I don't propose that you can stop all illegal activity, regardless of the level of law enforcement that you undertake or the level of border enforcement. But the idea that we shouldn't also look at the diversion of legal supply into to crime guns is also like just missing part of the picture. Now, of course, I come from a family where my uncles were hunters. I come from a community where we have a firing range, and there are legal gun owners as well. And the real question is, it's not a question of what rules we put in place. It's a question of, are we going to make sure those rules are as effective as possible? Now, if I'm being constructively critical, I would say if you looked at the federal buyback dollars, and instead of spending dollars on a buyback program, if we directed those dollars to programs that did deliver serious results on an outcome basis that we see in Canada and other countries when it comes to public safety initiatives of community first initiatives, I think there's a reasonably good argument to say, how can we best, as an opportunity cost question, allocate scarce dollars? But the idea that we shouldn't take gun control seriously, especially, and the idea we're flipping and say it's all about dollars, guns coming from the U.S.
Thank you, sir. All right, we'll move down to Dr. Strauss. Your final question, and it is this. Mr. Poilievre has consistently voted against environmental measures, and under his leadership, the Conservative Party has committed to scrapping the industrial carbon tax and expanding fossil fuel infrastructure by building new pipelines. This represents a shift from the party's 2021 platform, which included a consumer carbon price, an industrial carbon price, and a commitment to reducing domestic emissions by 30% below 2005 levels. Given that the students in this room will be governed by the consequences of today's climate decisions, how do you reconcile your party's energy platform with Canada's obligations to future generations, and how does expanding fossil fuel production constitute a responsible climate policy for the next generation?
I'm so sorry I have to strenuously object to the premise of the question again. Canada is responsible for 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Nothing that Canada does on this file is going to change the climate that any of you experience in your life. We could all set our cars, not set them on fire. We could all swear in this room to never ever drive a car again, never turn up on a barbecue again, never eat a steak again. It would not make the slightest difference if Canada's GHG emissions went to zero. Global warming is a global phenomenon. When China, India, and the United States have massively, China and India are massively increasing global GHG production, that is what is going to determine what the CO2 ppm are in 10, 20, 30 years. They are not reducing their production. They are very hot countries. I'm sorry to say, regretfully, they will bear the brunt of what happens. This is a very cold country that doesn't produce very much GHG emissions. So, we have to control the things. Like God give me the strength to change the things that I can change and the wisdom to know the things that I can't change. This is something we cannot change in Canada. But another point I want to make, this is just an interesting fact that you all should know. From 2016 to 2020, Justin Trudeau was the Prime Minister of Canada. Nate Erskine Smith was in Canada's House of Commons. Donald Trump, the benighted President of the United States, was in office from 2016 to 2020. And GHG emissions went down more in the United States over those 4 years, proportionally per capita, than they did here in Canada. So they've talked this big game, they've flamed panic and existential angst about something that we cannot change, and they haven't even matched the Trump White House for GHG emission reduction. So I don't believe that they believe the stuff they say on this topic.
Thank you for your response. Our final question of this adversarial section goes to Nate.
There's no rebuttal there.
In our Q&A section, we'll be a little bit more loose with the timing. We'll just get through this last question, all right? Okay, here we go. Public polling by Abacus Data currently shows majority support for pipeline development across every province and age bracket. The company Canadian Natural Resources recently deferred a multi-billion-dollar expansion, citing a lack of federal clarity on major projects. Meanwhile, Germany, India, Japan, and Poland are actively seeking Canadian energy at a moment when 20% of global supply is disrupted through the Strait of Hormuz. Canada has a moral and strategic opportunity to supply democratic allies who are currently purchasing from authoritarian regimes. Yet Northern Gateway was cancelled, Energy East collapsed, and Prime Minister Carney has provided no direction on pipelines or accelerated another national project since taking office. Mr. Erskine Smith, when your own voters support this, when Canadian companies are investing elsewhere, and when our allies are asking, what is the federal government waiting for to build the pipeline to BC? 2 minutes.
Okay, so first off, all respect on the Liberal record on climate change, but we are the first government in Canada's history, and Trump hasn't been able to do this either, where emissions and economic growth were properly decoupled because of the action we took on climate, whether you agree with it or not. And the other point that needs to be made is when you add up every country that has below 2% overall emissions, you add up those countries and it's the #1 emitter. And if you call it a global collective action problem, but then you don't take seriously what that actually means, and that we actually need to then work together and everyone has to do their collective part, you don't take collective action problems seriously. The last point to say, and specifically on pipelines, look, you're talking about a Liberal government that literally put over $30 billion into buying a pipeline and making the thing work. You're talking about a Liberal government now under Carney that has an MOU with Alberta around cooperation with a Conservative government in Alberta about what the way forward looks like on industrial carbon pricing, on methane rules, and around pipeline development. I think that MOU we gave up too much, frankly, all things considered, when it came to methane rules and other things. But overall, I can be constructively critical to say we should be taking climate change even more seriously. But the Prime Minister has been clear that they're going to work constructively and seriously with the Premier and the government of Alberta on pipeline development where it makes sense. And that question of where it makes sense, it's easy to say, well, today We've got to make sure we develop our natural resources, and of course, I mean, that's why Trans Mountain got built in the first place. You also have to look at timelines and arcs and demand, and when you look at the International Energy Agency modeling of where demand is going and where it's going to be, and you care about there being a business case and putting either public dollar or public support into some of these things, which is what Alberta is looking at, you got to be really serious about the math and whether there is actually going to be sustainable demand given the timeline of these projects.
And thank you both. Yeah. Feel free. Okay. So this is the time you've all been waiting for. This is the audience Q&A section. We have some time for this, but it will be limited. I ask you to keep your questions clear, brief, and respectful, addressing them to one or both MPs. We're going to loosely limit your responses to like 2 minutes. You can each comment, but we'll try to get through as many as possible. That's what we're going to do. Yeah. So please raise your hands, and we'll go from here. Yes, over on the right. We'll bring a mic over to you. This lady here. Thank you, Chris.
Hi. Yeah. Good evening, Mr. Erskine Smith. I hope I have pronounced your name correctly. Good evening. So I have a question for you. So you have built, as you said, a reputation for independence by voting sometimes more often than other liberal MPs against your party. And however, you voted with the government for invoking the Emergencies Act. So since then, the courts have twice ruled that that decision was unconstitutional. So recently, the Liberal government decided to appeal to the Supreme Court. Do you support this decision? Yes or no? Thank you.
Okay, so I take no issue with an appeal because I think it's fine to have the highest court in the land weigh in on this. We've had a commissioner weigh in, and then we have the Federal Court of Appeal that has weighed in with a thoughtful decision. I will say this, though, that yes, I voted for it. Joelle Lightbound and I also gave speeches in the House of Commons articulating concerns with the invocation of the Emergencies Act as a matter of law. Like, of course, I think the law has to be enforced, and I don't think it was being adequately enforced at a local level, and I was clear about that. You can't have lawlessness, and Ottawa faced lawlessness. Also, at the same time, when you saw the thresholds, the specific thresholds around the invocation of an emergency in the Act, it really was borrowed from the CSIS Act, and it's a very high threshold that I didn't think was met. And if you read my speech, where I said I'm voting for this specifically because the government has made it a confidence matter, and I have committed all along as a Liberal that I'm going to be there to support platform promises and confidence matters, and that was the commitment to constituents from day one, and there isn't a lot of ability to disagree apart from that. So the best I can do in a moment like that is I can articulate my concerns in the House of Commons, which is what I did. And if you read that speech, and then you read the Federal Court of Appeal, it's a longer decision than my speech, but it's the same argument that the Federal Court of Appeal was bringing to bear that I brought to bear in that speech.
Thank you, Nate. Matt, would you like to comment on that briefly?
We're getting closer to that endorsement because I like what you have to say. I obviously I would have preferred if you voted against the government. I know you're a man of principle. I wish that you had stood on principle at that time. I wish you'd stand on it now and just say that you do regret it, because I think peaceful protest is a core fundamental right. I think the Trudeau government was doing a lot of things that were popular at the time but turned out to be fundamentally wrong. And that was one of them. So I hope you will come to regret that vote. When I think back to that time, I wrote an article for the Toronto Sun. The only person harmed at that protest was a disabled Indigenous grandmother who was knocked over by a police horse. And she was shouting love, peace, and happiness. You can watch it on video when she got knocked over by that police horse. And the Emergencies Measures Act sent that police horse, and it shouldn't have happened.
Just keeping in mind, though, when it comes to peaceful protest, because of course, in a free and democratic society, peaceful protest is absolutely essential and needs to be protected. It's the height of hypocrisy, though, when you have conservatives that jump at the first chance to have police enforce the law against protests when they're indigenous protesters and a pipeline, and yet or the rail line, and you then have the same conservatives that go and take donuts to folks who are shutting down the streets of Ottawa. Again, peaceful protest is welcome, but there are limits to that peaceful protest, and the law also has to be enforced.
This is good. If the moderator doesn't mind, I will say, yeah, of course we're for laws being enforced, and we agree that laws weren't being enforced and laws should have been enforced, but people who donated $20 should not have had their mortgage frozen in London, Ontario. Like that, it was totally bananas.
But again, if you read, no one reads parliamentary speeches. I do get that. But if you were to read my speech, you would see there are two core challenges that I put to the invocation of the Act. And one was grounded in the fact that it didn't meet the specific threshold set out in the Act. And the second piece was around the seizure and government action to freeze assets, which again I thought was overbroad on the basic case law. And so, I think we're in rough agreement. I do think when you've got, it's hard to take seriously the idea that, well, conservatives of course agree that law should be enforced, when you've got literally Poilievre on the front lines of that convoy supporting and congratulating and emboldening those very same protesters.
I'll give you 15 seconds.
I don't know if the protester that he handed the donuts to was violating the law at the time that he handed that protester those donuts. So I just don't know about that. The people who had parking violations, the parking violations, they should be ticketed, they should be towed, and I don't think that giving someone a donut means otherwise. Thanks.
All right, so we're going to move on from this. Good discussion, just to keep things flowing. We have a gentleman over here. Please ask your question.
Hey, Nate. First of all, great job. Most convinced I've ever been by a Liberal MP, so great work.
It's a low bar. It's a low bar.
Agreed. And but my question is, you listed all these amazing changes to housing, right? The buyer first, removing corporate interests, cutting some red tape. But my question is, the Liberals have been in government for over 10 years, and housing prices have only gone up. The prospects of me and my classmates getting a house have only gone lower. Who's responsible, and why haven't these changes happened?
So I will say a few things. First, I'll say, speaking of protesters, I was out speaking to protesters outside of Parliament Hill, and they were giving me shit about this and about that, and we went back and forth and had a fulsome conversation. At the end, I go to shake her hand, and she gives me a hug, and she goes, I know you're a Liberal, but you don't sound like a Liberal. And I said, that's the nicest thing, it's the nicest thing I've heard all day. I will say on housing a couple of things. One, when we talk about cutting red tape, right? So we have a housing accelerator fund that was designed to do just this. Poilievre had a little bit more Byzantine approach to say we're going to punish municipalities that don't get things built. The challenge with that approach, of course, is that then you take a city like Edmonton that has pretty good rules in place actually when it comes to ending exclusionary zoning, and they're not the problem when you look at the numbers, and you're asking them to clock on a compounded basis over and above their existing success, where you have failing municipalities that aren't able to build, and they're just being asked to clock, again, like a certain compound, that functionally doesn't make sense if you want to get homes built. So the Housing Accelerator Fund I liked because it was, here's dollars, you change the rules of the game. I think it was well-intentioned. It could have been probably implemented better, but at the end of the day, you have the federal government using its spending power when, what do we actually need? We actually need provinces. Municipalities are creatures of the province, and you need provinces to say with a stroke of a pen, here are the rules of the game. We're providing certainty to builders. We're going to make sure we end exclusionary zoning. There's going to be gentle density everywhere, greater density near transit and your post-secondary education, and we are going to get things built. Here are the rules of the game. BC's done a better job of this more recently, although they've got challenges for many years before that. But at the end of the day, we don't have a provincial government that is taking this as seriously. The second thing to say on dollars and cents for non-market housing, I just don't think we're operating at scale in a way that we could and should operate at the federal level. And then the other knock-on challenge, when you look at the province of Ontario right now, as we have increased dollars for housing spend, they have decreased dollars. So you see an increase in homelessness because it's reactionary spending. What marks this Doug Ford government? reactionary politics. As they increase dollars on homelessness, though, they are decreasing dollars on the long-term solution, which is dollars for social and long-term non-market housing. So at the end of the day, look, I think, of course, the federal government should step up at scale. Build Canada Homes is a good start, but it is a down payment if we are taking seriously this idea of building homes with a wartime effort. But man, is the province, the largest province in the country, completely missing in action, and we need serious leadership.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, I think for the sake of time, we'll go for more questions. Yes, so I will take this gentleman here, and then we'll take another question from that side of the room. Yes, back there. Yep, right there. Ashley, you come in. We'll start on this side.
Hello, I have a question about Bill C9. I believe this is a bill you've both voted differently on. Do you believe that the bill does an adequate job of defining hate? Furthermore, could this bill be used to shut down protests? For example, could it flag Palestinian protests as anti-Semitic, or could it flag anti-immigration protests as racist?
Question. So we're going to have both of you comment. We'll start with Matt and then go to Nate.
Sorry, it was a two-part and complicated question, and I don't like C9, but not fully for the reasons you delineated. I just think it's such a smokescreen. It is meant to. The Liberals say that it is meant to protect Jews in Toronto, in particular, from violent harassment. Violent harassment is already illegal. Intimidation is already illegal. We have, for 10 years now, had a government that can't seem to keep the people who stab people in prison, whether it's hate-motivated or otherwise. So I think that we have a very significant enforcement problem in this country. I don't think we need C9 to address this when we already have good laws in place to protect people. I'm terribly concerned by the removal of the religious exemption vis-a-vis hate crime. That exemption was put in by the Paul Martin government back in 2004, and I think it's directionally wrong to take it out now. But to your question, particularly as to what will happen from this law, that is unclear to me. Like, I think a lot more will be under judicial discretion. I'm generally concerned by that, and I've read it several times. I am not a lawyer. I'm concerned, but I'm not sure how it's going to shake out. If it is the case that it ends up, again, violating the fundamental freedom for expression and peaceful protest, then I will be more against it than I already am.
So I do think hate is sufficiently defined in the bill. I actually think the protection of religious speech was always a bit superfluous as far as it goes. I don't think it's going to make one difference one way or the other. We aren't going to see enforcement. If people are in good faith practicing their religion, we're not going to see the law come down on that full stop. That would be not consistent with the charter, and it just wouldn't happen. But I understand why. I've heard from folks who are religious in my community who share that concern just because of the optics and what it looks like, even though they understand where I'm coming from when I explain the law. On the question of protests, I think we have to take this very seriously, especially when you just had the Premier threaten a protest and try to shut down with a last-minute injunction, a protest that then the court rightly said, look, even protests we don't agree with, is absolutely essential and fundamental in our society. So we do have to take seriously this idea of infringing upon free speech. I will say, though, that when we look at, again, the specifics of that law, what we're really talking about is intimidation. What we're really talking about is interference and harassment from accessing a place of worship. So long as the law is properly defined and specific to intimidation, harassment, and interference, I don't think we are going to see the same challenges, although we should be wary of those and keep a very close eye on it. And then the last thing to say, and Matt should maybe join me on the campaign trail, it is effective enforcement that is oftentimes the challenge. It's not the laws that are on the books. And who's responsible for effective enforcement? The province of Ontario.
Thank you. We'll now move to our next question. Yeah, that's fine. All right, we have one right back there. Go ahead.
Topic, medical assistance in dying. When it was first put into legislation, it was intended to be rare. It's now like 5th leading cause of death in Canada. And I'm curious in your perspectives of when legislation is being crafted theoretically with the assistance of experts, and when it is put into practice, and it ends up being different than anyone thought it would be. If you could speak to that as like lawmakers, like how does that come into play?
Thank you. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so we'll have Nate comment first because that's your government who had that policy, and then Matt will get you to respond. Let's go.
Okay, so I will say I actually didn't vote for MAID in the first instance because I thought it was inconsistent with the Carter criteria at the Supreme Court, and I thought it should have been expanded in a way that it ultimately was. I will also say when you talk about the leading cause, we have to be again clear about the data, because what we're really talking about overwhelmingly is people near the end of their life that are using it, people suffering debilitating illnesses that where they could live out the 3 months left or 6 months left of suffering from cancer, and instead they're choosing, with the love and comfort of their family around them, death with dignity, right? So just being clear about the other thing to say is, of course, we should be looking at the underlying data and saying, are there concerning trends? You know what the most concerning trend to me is? We see a ton of conversation and debate around medical assistance in dying. Folks who are accessing that are accessing it through by way of medical care, by way of engaging mental health experts. When I look at the underlying data, the thing that concerns me most is people committing suicide, especially younger people committing suicide where they don't have access to those supports. And I think if we took the same, politically, frankly, if we took the same oxygen and time and we spent it on people who are committing suicide because they don't have access to mental health care, they don't have access to supports, instead of medical assistance in dying, where overwhelmingly the data is that the system can be improved, but the system is functioning actually as we intended it to, overwhelmingly, I think we'd all be better served.
So I practice critical care medicine. I look after a lot of my patients, sadly, towards the end of their life. In any ICU in Canada, 25% of the patients don't make it out. And I practice outside of ICUs, and I specialize in really sick people. And one thing it's a little bit tangential to your question. No, it's not. It's on the question. In my whole career, I have had precisely one person ever ask me about medical assistance in dying. Because once you're in the hospital, we have access to excellent palliative care. I'm not a palliative care specialist, but because of critical care is pretty close. So I practice palliative care in many respects. So I've never had somebody who was receiving proper palliative care ask for medical assistance in dying, which I think goes to Nate's point. Like, if the rest of the system was working properly, perhaps we wouldn't see this unconscionable, really concerning problem with the way the legislation is being applied that, in important ways that are difficult to describe in 1 minute, threaten the ethos of my profession of medicine, really importantly. Like, not doing euthanasia is in the Hippocratic Oath. The Hippocratic Oath is 2,500 years old, and we just threw that away one day. And I don't think proper deliberation went into it at that time. And I think any time is a good time to reopen the discussion with the further information that we have now. So thank you for bringing it up. I think it's been several years. It should be reevaluated.
I know we were short on time. I'll just say, for someone who articulated a case where the primary consideration at all times has to be liberty, not taking that same approach when it comes to medical assistance in dying and the core of autonomy to our basic fundamental sense of dignity, I think is missing the point.
Yeah, I didn't say that I want to take away anyone's liberty vis-a-vis euthanasia. I said that the legislation as it has come through was under-deliberated, has been applied in ways that were not anticipated, and that needs to be reevaluated. So I don't think I came after anyone's liberty there, and I don't think there's any hypocrisy. But
okay. Thank you. We're going to move on to the next questions. Thank you for the insightful question. Hands up again. Yes, back there in the red sweater. And yes, back there, checkered shirt. We'll start with the person in the red sweater there.
So my question isn't really directed to anyone specific, just generally. I came across this post on Instagram the other day where someone goes up to a police car and he's talking to the officer and he says, buddy, no one goes to jail anymore. You just go and you sign a paper and you say you'll come to court one day and you're out. As someone, I'm from Vaughan, and I hear a lot about like break and enters. So I don't really get how we can feel safe when if someone commits a violent crime against me or my family, they're out the next day. And again, there's been a lot of discussions from the police organizations that say those people that we do arrest are repeat offenders. So how do we fix that problem?
Question. We'll go to Nate first.
Yeah, I mean, I can start. So twice we've looked at bail reform and moved to strengthen bail reform, in keeping with, by the way, recommendations from police forces, police chiefs, and provincial AGs. Okay, the idea that bail reform is the central problem, I think, is a mistake, and I'll tell you why. Because we see pretrial detention actually massively increase over the last decade, and pretrial detention, if we actually take public safety considerations long term seriously, pretrial detention and an increase in pretrial detention, folks who are, just being clear, innocent until proven guilty, we see increased recidivism, we see increased public safety risks by exposing more people to the justice system and to jail as they are waiting their trial. If we take the long-term view of public safety, of course, in the short term, no one wants to see repeat violent offenders, and that isn't what we're regularly seeing is out on bail. What we are seeing, we're seeing stays of prosecution. We're seeing people released as a matter of human rights and charter rights because the jail conditions are so brutal, because we have seen provincial underinvestment in the jail system. And we see an over-reliance on pretrial detention for people who shouldn't be there, and we see an underuse, frankly, of pretrial detention for the repeat violent offenders that we need to see. And it's an underinvestment in the jail system and the administration of justice, unfortunately.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, Matt.
I think bail reform is the solution. Bail reform was the problem. Like the Trudeau government, Nate knows I love Jody Wilson-Raybould, and she likewise stood up to Justin Trudeau during the SNC-Lavalin system. But her bail reforms broke the system, and not just technically. Nate's a lawyer, and he understands the technicalities of criminal justice in ways that I agree I do not. But there's also like directionality and ethos and spirit. And when you have a federal government saying, no, we have to have more compassion on folks, and we have to let more violent offenders out, and you're abusing their rights in this way or that way for keeping a multiple rapist in prison. I think even if you fix what technically was broken, the direction, like this leftist idea that like every civilization on earth has understood, unfortunately 1% to 2% of the population are violent sociopaths, and once they start acting on their violent sociopathy, you gotta put them away. Like, for 150,000 years of human civilization, people have understood that, and this is a very novel idea that we should let them out as often as we do in Canada currently. So that leftism affects I think the whole criminal justice system, top to bottom, the province, the judiciary, the prosecutors, the police, in multiple ways. But the federal government can start to set the direction aright by my lights.
Again, though, we're not talking about,
Okay, very brief.
A conversation about bail reform that is specific to repeat violent offenders, we're probably going to agree on almost everything. But that's not what we talk about when we talk about bail reform. We're talking about increased pretrial detention for a guy who loves liberty. He's throwing away this idea of innocent until proven guilty. No, but if you are increasing, we've seen a massive increase in pretrial detention because bail isn't the only problem. Bail problems go both ways, and they have long-term public safety risks that the cops understand too. That repeat violent offenders, of course, throw the book at them, crack down, of course. But beyond that, pretrial detention can be a problem.
Okay. I'll give you like 30 seconds max, and then we're gonna get on to the next question.
Oh, I don't know if I need it. Like, okay. I've started now. I'm not a libertarian absolutist. I am a conservative. I'm a liberal conservative. I believe that human liberty needs to be guarded. But when you violently assault someone, a man in downtown,
we're gonna agree.
Okay, great. Okay, awesome. This is what we want. We want agreement sometimes. Yeah, it's good. It's good. Okay. All right. We're gonna go back there. Your question.
Hi. I wanted to ask about grocery prices, specifically, in that Bill C-19 was recently passed, which was a temporary relief on grocery prices, basically. But I feel it doesn't address the key issue of why grocery prices have ballooned in Canada. And the reason that is because, the free market on something as essential as groceries has created monopolies in Canada. Loblaws, Metro, Sobeys, they make up, basically under certain brands, but they make up the majority of grocery chains. And so that's best demonstrated by, from a 4-year span, from 2018 to 2023, the Loblaws profit margin maintained at 4%, which in a vacuum seemed fine, but if you take in the context of the pandemic over those years, why, when people are closing down, people are losing jobs, why should Loblaws maintain that 4% profit margin versus everyone suffers?
Thanks
and
for
so
your
my question is, what are, what are policies to recommend that would put regulations and caps on these grocery companies to maintain affordability of essential groceries?
Awesome. Okay, who would like to go first? Let's go with Matt.
Yeah, I think once again, I have to object to the premise of the question. What happened during the pandemic is mom and pop stores were subject to ridiculous, overbearing, not evidence-based public health and political overreach, and they don't have lobbyists. So lots of gyms were shut down, but Good Life had lobbyists. I love Good Life, I'm a member there. I don't hate the player, hate the game. They have lobbyists who are able to lobby in every province. And Jason Kenney, the Premier of Alberta, eventually apologized for what they did this way, because supercenters, like if you were selling some hardware, you were essential, and the regulations that were put on mom and pops were insurmountable. And so a lot of mom and pops went under in multiple industries, not just groceries. And I don't think that further regulating the big guys to make up for over-regulating the small guys is the answer. I think you should regulate less the small guys. And grain, the socialization of grain production and distribution was tried in the Soviet Union. It ended up with bread lines and Holodomor, and it should not be tried here.
Thanks. We're going to leave it at this response.
Okay, so we are a country of oligopolies, and it's not just limited to the grocery sector. It's the airline sector, it's the funeral sector, telecommunications sector, on down the list. At the outset of the pandemic, if you remember, the grocery store CEOs felt comfortable enough communicating directly with each other about reducing hero wages for low-income workers, an insane thing to do, because there's no reason for them to ever communicate with one another on this topic unless it's to collude to reduce wages, which was not a criminal offense at the time, and we made it a criminal offense by virtue of work collaboratively across the industry committee at the time. So there are absolutely some rules we can put in place, but I think it's ultimately about how do you empower competition in this space. You see some actions out of Manitoba to try and make it easier for folks to start up and on property taxes, on reducing the costs. It's tough. I think you see some action out of Manitoba as well around personal using large reams of data to have dynamic pricing that is problematic on the consumer side, but it's really, really hard with these structural competitiveness problems across sectors, and I think we need, at all levels of government, to take that core question of competition much more seriously.
Thank you. All right, we're going to do another round of questions here. Yes, behind the fellow in the red sweater and the burgundy one, the burgundy sweater. Yeah, just right behind the last guy. Thanks. And we'll do one more as well. Yeah, back there. Yes. All right, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so we did touch a little bit on housing earlier, but I just had another question regarding how you guys approach, how to address housing prices. Oftentimes we hear about the supply side of that issue, where we kind of just hear cut red tape and then we can build more homes and that'll solve all the problems. But we don't really hear much about the demand side of that issue. And the idea that we could just build infinitely is not realistic, because it's not really economically or fiscally or environmentally sustainable. And there's also just the way Canada is built right now, there's only a few limited areas that people actually want to live. So I was a bit curious about how you guys kind of approach the demand side of that issue, typically, especially considering the fact that one of the biggest problems, I think personally, is that there's a lot of homeowners that are typically wealthier and older that are kind of incentivized to want housing prices to go higher, because that means that their property values are going to be higher, at the same time as there's prospective home buyers who are younger and not as wealthy. So how do you kind of attack that demand challenge?
Thanks. We'll go to Nate. Yep.
Okay, so I don't think there's any single solution to this, and I think even on the supply side, one piece we've missed is just the connection between transit and housing. When you say there are only a few people places that people want to live. I mean, I don't think that's entirely true, but beyond that, I think we need to connect communities, and then it is easier to get around from places where we live to places that we work, and then there are more places that we can potentially live and close to our work. So I think transit is intimately connected with this on the supply side as well. On the demand side, look, governments typically, because of sort of shameless electoral politics, will say, and here's a subsidy here, and here's a subsidy there, and here's a subsidy here. I did mention one demand side piece where when investment dollars come into this space in the residential resale market, you do want to tamp down, I think, significantly on that demand. They should not be competing with you to buy your first home or a place that you are going to want to live. So there are some demand side pieces that we can lean into, but I do think generally it's a bit of a challenge because oftentimes those demand side solutions turn into subsidies, which are ultimately not long-term sustainable solutions.
Thanks. Would you like to comment briefly?
I don't need to.
Awesome. Great. Let's move to that question back there. Brevity's good.
Yeah.
Please, go ahead.
Okay. Just really quickly, I wanted to mention that Lebanon is a very mountainous country, so there's actually a lot of snow there.
But not like Canada.
No, I know it's not a geography debate, but this is, I think, more targeted towards you, Matt. I think I took issue with your healthcare question answer earlier, talking about maintaining competition in the healthcare sector. But I would hope that as a conservative, someone who's talking about having systems already figured out, that we can see, that even by the time of Tommy Douglas and other countries around the world, that Econ 101 tells us that healthcare is something that has inelastic demand, and other countries like the Nordic countries, Germany, and here in Canada, like I just want you to explain that contradiction between Econ 101, inelastic demand, and how you conflate that with having competition in a healthcare market where we've clearly seen historically and abroad that's not what brings good healthcare solutions.
Sorry, what was the last line? We've seen
where we've seen here and internationally abroad that competition in the healthcare market is not what brings the best healthcare outcomes and wait times.
Once again, I have to object to the premise of your question. I'll put it on the banner next time. So generally, when international bodies rank healthcare systems internationally, Canada winds up second to dead last, and the United States is often dead last. And I'm agnostic about which reforms we pursue, but if you go around the world, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, Australia, France, Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, the UK, France, Spain, and Portugal, they all have more efficient and effective healthcare systems than us, and a number of them do build competition in some way. So I'm once again not saying user pay. I'm not saying pay with a credit card. I'm saying pay with OHIP. But those who design the system need to understand that you have to build incentivization back in, because the story I told you about my wife, I can tell you 15 names from news stories of stories like that. I can tell you about a friend of mine who died in a similar situation. The crisis is here, and putting on blinders and just refusing to see what Australia is doing is it's a non-starter for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. And we're going to have to leave it there, folks. It's 8:20. We want to have time for our social event, which is happening right after this. So we're going to leave it there. I want to thank all of you for coming. Please give a round of applause to our two debaters. That's right. Okay, and thank you all for coming. So there's a social right outside. We're going to have food there. There's time to talk. We have current MPs, other current MPs. We have past candidates, future candidates. Please socialize outside. Thank you all for coming. Awesome. Thank you, folks.